Innocent. Father Innocent.
Good morning to you all, especially to our listeners and our viewers who are following us on YouTube on this second day of our conference on refugees, migrants, displaced people belonging together in solidarity. We started our conference yesterday with a keynote message from His Eminence Michael Cardinal Czerny from the Dicastery for Integral Human Development in Rome on migration and interreligious dialogue. This conference is co-organized by the Global Ministries University in California, the Institute of Interreligious Dialogue and Islamic Studies, IRDIS, at Tangaza University in Nairobi, Harmony Institute in Nairobi, Hekima University College, which is going to lead this panel under the leadership of Professor Elias from the Hekima Institute for Peace and International Relation, and the Global Forum for Dialogue, which is in Frankfurt in Germany. Yeah. This conference is inspired by the Fratelli Tutti encyclical letter by Pope Francis in 2020 and his meeting with Sheikh Al-Tayeb, of the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar University. So there is an interreligious connotation and outlook of this conference. This morning, we started with a keynote message from His Excellency Hubertus van Megen, the Apostolic Nuncio to Kenya, and making also his reference to Sudan and South Sudan, where he was also Nuncio, and speaking also from his personal experience of encounter with the refugee and migrants community. So this is the second session of today, and which will be led by Professor Elias Opongo from the Hekima Institute for Peace and International Relations. Professor is well known for his publication in the area of justice and peace, and in relation to the studies at the Hekima Institute for International Relations. So without taking too much time, I would like to appreciate Professor Elias for putting up together this team, which will lead us in reflection on the same topic on migrants, refugees, displaced persons belonging together in solidarity. What was clear from the Nuncio this morning, he put up a call to action, and he called the academia also really to play their part in terms of research, and also and the data on the positive impact of the refugees in their host communities. So refugees are not only a burden, but they contribute to the society. But maybe that part of the aspect of their contribution to the host communities and the impact, to the positive impact, that has not been really emphasized, because we always see them as a burden. So just to put us up in the mood as an academic community, that is also a call to action, which came from the message of the Nuncio this morning. As Hekima University College, as Tangaza University, and GMU, I think we have a responsibility in answering to that call from the, and this is only a beginning of our reflection, which will continue on after the conference. And just a reminder that all the presentation, will be required the presenters to give us their papers that will be put together into a book that will be published subsequently. So, Prof, you are welcome to introduce the other panelists and the topic of the day. You are most welcome.
Thank you very much, Dr. Innocent, for that good introduction to this particular conference. Since this is the third global conference on Fratelli Tutti, and we are very happy as a Hekima University College in collaboration with Jesuit Refugee Service and Tangaza University to co-host this particular panel. So on our panel today, first, as Dr. Innocent has said, my name is Father Elias Opongo. I teach here at Hekima University College, the Institute of Peace Studies International Relations, which is a master's program. And I'm also director of our Center for Research, Training, and Publications. We're very glad to host this particular session. And our speakers will include Reverend Professor Bill O'Neill from the Jesuit Refugee Service. He's going to talk about the ethics of accompaniment, a moral framework for working with refugees. And we'll also have Mr. Atsu, who is the Regional Director of the Eastern African Region of Jesuit Refugee Service. His topic will be on lessons from the field, successes, challenges, and the future of refugees. And then we have Ms. Amaya Valcarcel from Jesuit Refugee Service in Rome Advocacy Office. She will be talking about global advocacy for refugees and vulnerable immigrants and vulnerable migrants, building solidarity. We all have 15 minutes each for this presentation, and then we could engage with question answer with other participants, and maybe Yusuf will help us to see also those in Zoom who will be able to put in their questions. So without much further ado, I'll start with some opening directions in terms of where we are and where we want to go on this topic. So my focus is particularly on migration and accompaniment, but I'm linking humanitarian service with sustainable peace in Africa. So just in honoring Pope Francis' call for global collaboration and human fraternity, I'm glad to present this particular talk. It's going to be more of a reflection on diverse issues that are facing our continent of Africa today. So distinguished delegates and esteemed colleagues and friends in the global movement for justice and peace, I begin by acknowledging the theme of this esteemed conference, migration and accompaniment under Fratelli Tutti. This particular theme, as we know, calls upon us to embrace human fraternity, global collaboration, and solidarity in the face of the challenges confronting our world today. Pope Francis, through Fratelli Tutti, reminds us that no one is saved alone. In fact, in today's first reading, we are invited in the letter to the Hebrews to pay attention to the strangers. And he says, you never know who you are inviting or who you are welcoming. It may be an angel of God. We are all interconnected, and our response to migration, conflict, and humanitarian crisis must be rooted in shared responsibility for justice and peace. Today, I would like to focus on pressing issues in Africa, especially the disconnect between humanitarian service and sustainable peace. While billions of dollars are spent annually on aid and peacekeeping, conflicts persist, displacements increase, and suffering deepens. Why? Because we are treating the symptoms of the crisis without addressing their root causes. I urge us to reflect on three key challenges. The first one is on decolonizing humanitarian aid so that it empowers rather than creates dependency. The second is on the root causes of conflicts rather than relying on military solutions. And the third is prioritizing dialogue and mediation as the foundation for lasting peace. I think there was somebody else talking in the background, so I don't know who it is.
Could I ask all the others to just to mute themselves? Yes, yeah. Thank you. Go on, Prof.
Okay. So I'm saying I'll be focusing on three main things. So decolonizing humanitarian aid so that it empowers rather than creates dependency. And the second is addressing the root causes of conflicts rather than relying on military solutions. And the third is prioritizing dialogue and mediation as a foundation for lasting peace. So first, the urgency of rethinking humanitarian aid in Africa. Africa is home to some of the world's most severe humanitarian crises. Literally, if you look at the southern region, we have Mozambique and all the displacements that are taking place there. If you look at the Great Lakes and the Central African region, we have Congo, DRC, as well as Central African Republic and Cameroon, that all seem to have millions of people displaced. And then when you go to West Africa, we have the Sahel region of Mali, Niger, as well as Burkina Faso, that due to these extremist groups that exist within the region have led to humanitarian catastrophe of displacements. And then you have northern Nigeria with Boko Haram that has also equally displaced quite a number of people. Now, with humanitarian assistance has become an industry growing larger every year, while sustainable peace efforts remain stagnant. Just as an example, this week alone, we have more than 500,000 Congolese refugees who've just been displaced by the attacks of the M23 into the city of Goma. If aid were to truly solve the crisis, why do we continue to see an increase in displacement, violence, and instability? This raises a fundamental question. Is humanitarian aid a solution, or has it become part of the problem? So we need to move towards decolonizing aid, moving from charity to justice. Humanitarian aid in many ways remains a legacy of colonial structures, a system where decisions are made externally, often prioritizing the interest of donors rather than the needs of local communities. President Trump just announced that he has given a presidential decree to freeze aid through the USAID, which has been assisting many countries all over the world. Last year alone, in 2024, the US gave $6.6 billion in aid. Now, freezing this particular aid will, of course, affect especially the health sector a great deal. But maybe it's time to rethink this whole system of external aid for governments to begin looking internally on how they can be self-sufficient and prioritize on their needs. Pope Francis warns us against charity that lacks justice when he states that in Fratelli Tutti, charity is not a substitute for justice. It demands justice. Therefore, to decolonize aid, we must, one, shift from external interventions to local leadership. Africans must have agency in shaping their recovery and governance. Two, we need to end short-term fixes that perpetuate cycles of dependency. Relief efforts should be tied to long-term economic development, education, and governance reforms. There have been a lot of discussions, even within the UN and humanitarian sector, about localization and sustainability of aid systems. These need to integrate sustainable solutions. Number three, challenge global economic systems that fuel inequality. A number of these conflicts often are sustained by economic injustices, including extractive industries, unfair trade systems, foreign exploitation of African resources. In fact, Africa loses close to $150 billion in illicit aid. In illicit financial flows. And on top of that, there's also another more than 100 billion that is lost out of bad contracts and corruptions. So if you put all this together, with Africa receiving just slightly over $100 billion a year, we can do better than that. China gives only $60 billion. Oh, that was 3 years ago, just about $60 billion to 55 African countries. That is slightly just above a billion per country, but they've cut that down almost by 30%. Addressing the root causes, this is my third part of the paper, addressing the root causes of conflict beyond the militarized approaches. Too often, military interventions are prioritized over diplomatic and social solutions. Governments and international bodies continue to invest in military responses rather than tackling the root causes of the conflict. So we see one failure of militarized responses. For example, peacekeeping missions in Africa are hosting billions, yet achieving little. In Democratic Republic of Congo alone, we have 16,000 UN peacekeepers. Yet M23, with only 4,000 fighters, have ended up controlling the city of Goma this week. South Sudan has 17,000 peacekeepers, 2,000 police officers, yet violence continues. Central African Republic has 17,460 peacekeepers, with $2.4 billion spent in just 39 months, yet the country remains unstable. These statistics paint a grim picture. We are funding peace without enforcing peace, without addressing socioeconomic inequalities, ethnic marginalization, resource conflicts. Military deployment only delays violence rather than resolve it. Two, the root causes of conflict must be addressed. For peace to be sustainable, we must tackle the real drivers of war. One, political and economic exclusion. Marginalized communities must be included in governance and decision-making. One of the cries of people of Eastern Congo, especially the Tutsi Banyamulenges of Eastern Congo, is that they've been excluded from the being, part and parcel of the national identity. But at the same time, we know that it's the minerals that has attracted the neighboring countries to move in to support more than 100 militia groups that exist in Congo because of a lot of external interest linked to the minerals. Illicit arms trade and external interferences. The global arms industry profits from Africa's conflict, while international diplomacy remains weak. We are yet to see what happens after the end of the war between Ukraine and Russia. Ukraine was one of the highest exporters of guns or arms to Africa, and now they've received so many arms aid from many countries. At the end of this war, we are likely to see proliferation of more arms from Eastern Europe. Resource-based conflicts and climate change. These need to be addressed, especially drought, land disputes, competition over resources that fuel instability, and especially in the Sahel and Horn of Africa. And so in my fourth and last part is about dialogue and mediation, which is the foundation for lasting peace. Pope Francis in Fratelli Tutti urges us to embrace dialogue over division by stating that the path to peace does not mean making society blandly uniform, but getting people to work together side by side in pursuing goals that benefit everyone. So why should mediation matter more than militarization? Well, mediation has successfully resolved many conflicts, even in Africa, we've seen, yet it remains underutilized in favor of military intervention that tend to perpetuate violence. Faith-based and traditional mediators, like religious leaders and elders, play a key role in conflict resolution and reconciliation. Women and youth inclusion are key for peace processes in order for them to be effective when they tend to be more effective when women and youth are involved. We also need to invest in community peace structures. Local mediation initiatives should receive the same level of funding as peacekeeping operations. We also need to learn from Africa's peace traditions, because African traditions have long emphasized restorative justice and reconciliation. For instance, Rwanda's Gacaca courts or Matoput system in northern Uganda, or the Elders Council in Sudan and Somalia. These have historically mediated disputes between conflicting parties. We must amplify these African-led solutions rather than impose Western models of peace that ignore local realities. And so there is a cost of ignoring these strategies of peace, especially when you look at Africa's humanitarian crisis. There are several major conflicts that are driving Africa's humanitarian emergencies: Sudan and South Sudan. We continue to see the civil war. The Sahel region, Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, Chad. We see jihadist insurgencies. Democratic Republic of Congo, we see the ongoing M23 conflict and resource wars. In Mozambique, Cabo Delgado conflict, we've seen insurgencies have displaced thousands of people. In northern Nigeria, Boko Haram, decades of violence. And in Anglophone crisis in Cameroon, we've seen political and armed conflicts in the English-speaking zones. And so there's a need for call to action. And this is what I propose. Number one, strengthening local peace-building efforts. Number two, transforming humanitarian aid into peace investment. Number three, holding global actors accountable, especially strengthening the arms control to stop the influx of weapons that fuel African conflicts, and also to advocate for fair trade and debt relief to prevent economic exploitation. And so in conclusion, I would say that Pope Francis reminds us that war is a failure of political humanity. If we continue to invest in war rather than peace, we will continue to fail. Humanitarian service must be linked to sustainable peace. A peace rooted in justice, dialogue, and human fraternity. We must replace dependency with dignity, charity with justice, and division with reconciliation. Africa's future should not be dictated by external forces or defined by endless wars. It must be built by its people in unity, resilience, and hope. Let us rise to this challenge together. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Prof. Now you can now introduce, call on the speaker.
Okay, Bill. Our second speaker is Reverend Professor Bill O'Neill. He'll be speaking to us from Georgetown University, but he has been closely linked with the work of Jesuit Refugee Service. So, and he's also a professor of social ethics here at Hekima University College. Reverend Professor Bill O'Neill.
Thank you, Elias, and thank you for your remarks. Really, it is a privilege to join you all today. You remind us, Elias, that the Psalm 85, that justice and peace will kiss, that the biblical ideal of shalom is never less than just. And that is what we are invited, I think, to follow in Fratelli Tutti. So my remarks today touch on accompaniment, a central theme, a leitmotif of our Jesuit refugee service. Refugees are caught between stories, the stories that they tell of themselves and the stories told of them. Just yesterday, I was speaking with a young man in Bukavu, a refugee. We were seeking to support him in his educational program, but the city is now facing the M23 besieged, and the life of refugees, stories that are told by others, the stories told of them. In fact, the very title, refugee, if we think of it, it signifies the unmaking of a world, of being placed in the story of another. And so often refugees, the internally displaced, stateless persons, are denied voice, and their story becomes one of loss. As Hannah Arendt, the great Jewish philosopher, said of refugees in the wake of the First World War, that the world found nothing sacred in the abstract nakedness of being human. And even with the subsequent ratification of the major instruments of international refugee law, as Elias has intimated, that Arendt's critique, I think, remains germane, that refugees are still nominally rightless in international law. A refugee is still not considered to be a true subject of such law, capable of enforcing his or her rights on the international plane. And the plight of refugees, as you have rehearsed for us, Elias, the plight of refugees in so many parts of our world, especially here in Africa, South Sudan, where I was recently, listening to the stories of the women, the caregivers, the mothers caring for children with severe disability. And there I must note our work is ceasing to some degree because of the cutbacks in funding and the aid streams to BPRM. But the plight of refugees is all about us in so many parts of our world. And as in the new millennium, as in the old, our very right to have rights is dependent upon membership in a particular community. So that the loss of that community, as Arendt says, is tantamount to being exiled from humanity altogether, enjoying, asserting, or enforcing basic claim rights. And this is despite the eclipse of the classical Westphalian system of sovereignty. This seems ineluctably bound to citizenship, membership. So as I say that the loss of home and political status is truly tantamount to exile, expulsion from humanity altogether. The alien then becomes a symbol, not of the generalized other, but as Arendt tells us, becomes a frightening symbol of difference as such. She speaks of these as the perplexities of human rights. And we see this, for increasingly today throughout our world, and certainly in my country, in the United States, that asylum policies, for instance, interdiction in international waters, extraterritorial processing, indefinite detention, criminal prosecution, rejection at the point of entry, and family separation, all these aim at deterring rather than integrating or resettling such aliens or strangers. Is it surprising then that we speak of illegal aliens whose very bodies have become illegal? They are deprived, as Arendt said, of their place in the world. That such migrants are rhetorically, morally effaced. They are divested of legal and even moral standing. That is our reality today. And we see this, I think, being acted even as I speak in the policies of the new Trump administration. A kind of abstract cruelty that allows our suffering brothers and sisters to be placed in such really dire straits. Now, accompaniment is telling a different story. It is to tell a different story, or rather, it is to enter into the story of another. In the words of Simone Weil, someone exactly like me, although marked by affliction. Accompaniment is where we begin. In the Jesuit refugee service, now operating in 57 different countries, accompaniment is where we begin. It inspires our work of service, everything we do, and our advocacy as well. We begin with accompaniment. And this implies that we recognize not strangers or aliens or even beneficiaries, but rather neighbors near and distant. The metaphor, the trope, is critical. And I would urge us here, insofar as possible, though we have to respond to the protocols of our donors, really to cease using the language of beneficiary. Because I think, as Elias said, this humanitarian understanding casts us in the role of benefactors. The refugee, the stateless person, the internally displaced person now becomes a mere supplicant. We are the benefactors. They are the beneficiaries. They remain inscribed within our story rather than allowing their own story to be told. So let us not speak of benefactors, because at the heart of this is pity, which is what the powerful or privileged bestow on the poor. Fratelli Tutti, on the other hand, speaks of compassion. In Francis's Spanish, misericordia, a movement of the heart, which is to recognize the fundamental equality we bear as brothers and sisters, those created in the very image of God, we believe. Compassion is a suffering with. It is entering in to the suffering of another, and indeed entering into the story of the other, just like me, although marked by affliction. And that really, I think, is at the heart of Fratelli Tutti. Accompaniment attests to our fundamental equality, our fundamental dignity. For Christians and Jews, it means that we are created, as I said, in the very image of God. For Muslims, we are God's viceroys, to be able to carry out God's work on earth. For Buddhists, for instance, in the image of the Bodhisattva, at the heart of our response to refugees is compassion, a moving of the heart. We have what some philosophers like John Rawls calls an overlapping consensus today of the fundamental dignity of persons, that persons have worth, irreducible worth, and not price. That dignity is permanent, it is irreplaceable. And that is why truly we cannot give dignity to someone, nor can dignity ever be restored, because it can never be forfeited or lost. But it can indeed be denied. And we see the systemic denial of dignity, as Elias has said so well, throughout our world, and particularly here in Africa. Dignity speaks of our common faith, what the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in its preamble speaks of as our common faith in the equal rights, the fundamental dignity of persons. That each person is irreplaceable. No one can tell your story but you. Each life, irreplaceable, infinitely precious before God. And I think, having been in South Sudan recently with so many refugees, innumerable coming in, truck after truck in the reception center. But in my heart and in my mind is the face of one little girl, 6 years old, we took down from the truck, put on a blanket, and simply said thank you to us, that each child is infinitely important. This fundamental equality before God, that no one has greater priority over another, save for the suffering. The equal dignity is where we begin. Each possesses this. Dignity can never be forfeited or lost, though, as I say, it can be denied. So accompaniment is our living affirmation of dignity. And it's a dignity that is parsed in the modern language of human rights, claim rights. And these rights are fundamental, they are interdependent. Because if we truly respect one another, if I respect you as a moral agent, then necessarily I respect those conditions or capabilities of your exercising agency, of your living your dignity. And these conditions or capabilities, as I say, are mutually interdependent. We begin with security, especially for women and children who are most vulnerable. Sexual harassment, rape used as a weapon of war. The most fundamental right is that of basic security. But security rights depend no less upon our recognition of basic welfare. Rights to nutrition, to potable water, to education, to healthcare, to employment. These are the conditions of the capabilities of exercising dignity in common. And then liberties of effective participation, civil political liberties. These rights flow from the very understanding of dignity. And tragically, they are denied by the very title refugee. I lived 3 years in the Kakuma refugee camp. When I arrived in 2019, the camp was home to some 200,000 refugees from 22 different countries. The average length of stay is 17 years. When I left just a year ago to begin work in Sudan and Uganda as well, we were 350,000. These refugee camps respond to what they call a protracted refugee situation, but the crises that inspire them are themselves protracted. As I say, the average stay is 17 years. Children are born there. A little girl from Burundi speaks no Kirundi because her whole life has been in encampment. What is the patria? What is resettlement of going home? The refugee camps create morally problematic trade-offs that for the sake of security and a modicum of nutrition, always falling less than the fundamental standards, the requirements for nutritional well-being. The price is a loss of freedom, a loss of representation, a loss of mobility, the capacity to be employed. So these trade-offs, perhaps permissible in the moment of extreme crisis, but to be themselves protracted for 17 years, create the paradox, the perplexities of human rights, where in the very name of rights, to give the substance of rights, we are denying their status as rights. Encampment is not a durable solution. Now, this humanitarian law, grounded, as I say, in the overlapping consensus regarding dignity and human rights, and those correlative duties that derive from rights, which are not just duties of forbearance that I pursue my life plan unimpeded, but rather, if you have a right, it necessarily implies standard guarantees, provision and protection, rights of performance. That if I respect you, I must respect the conditions of your exercising agency. And the duties I bear, as I say, are not merely those of forbearance, non-interference, but to provide the substance of rights as rights. and to offer the due protections. Now, our Catholic social teaching at the heart of Fratelli Tutti embraces the humanitarian rhetoric, but it necessarily interprets it. There is a distinctive inflection. Catholic teaching, to speak for a moment as a theologian, is Catholic in the uppercase sense, that it bears the distinctive religious tradition grounded, as Elias has reminded us, in the biblical imperatives of shalom, of peace, which always entails tzedakah, justice, hesed, mercy. That these fundamental values shape the very meaning of justice as fundamental covenant fidelity, a fidelity that we translate in the modern idiom of dignity, human rights, and correlative duties. But Catholic teaching emphasizes three distinct themes or leitmotifs as we interpret and apply the general humanitarian norms, and they reflect the biblical origins. The first is to speak of dignity is always to understand dignity and solidarity. When I first came to Africa, long before I earned these gray hairs as a young Jesuit in my 20s, I served under Julius Nyerere's political regime of Ujamaa. Later, I had the privilege of attending the South African Truth Commissions and my work as a theologian for reconciliation. And here we have the fundamental understanding of Mandela and Archbishop Desmond Tutu that you know so well. Of Ubuntu, a sense that we begin with the we that defines the I. We are, therefore, I am. Rights are ascribed not to sovereign selves abstracted from the ensemble of social relations, but to the community and the community of communities, a solidarity of solidarities. That is Ujamaa, that is Ubuntu. And Catholic teaching emphasizes dignity and solidarity. It is significant, I think, that we have no single word translating Ubuntu or Ujamaa. It is the genius of an African anthropology that reminds us there is no dignity but in solidarity, that in dignity our very freedom is bonded by the fundamental worth we recognize in each other, our creation in the very image of God. So dignity and solidarity is a leitmotif, the fundamental theme threaded throughout our interpretation of general norms as we accompany, as we serve, and as we advocate. Second, the understanding of liberty. In Western philosophic tradition of liberalism, the emphasis falls essentially on our negative liberty, what we are free from. Because we lack a common sense of solidarity, freedom becomes our emancipation from tradition, our ability to choose as we see fit. And yet the Catholic tradition emphasizes not merely what we are free from, but what we are free for. Dignity and community, Ujamaa, Ubuntu. And so the emphasis falls here not merely upon non-interference or forbearance, although these are critical, but the positive freedom of effective participation, that those who are most affected should have the greatest say. And here I think Professor Elias is absolutely right to recognize the local wisdom of those affected, that refugees have voice, be given to speak, that they are the ones who know their situation best. Effective participation is absolutely critical. And this is something in our policies that move us beyond just the humanitarian ethos to a profound understanding of the exigencies of social justice. And finally, what the liberation theologians speak of as an option for the poor. This is so fundamental. It becomes the very lens through which we understand the humanitarian protocols and norms, humanitarian law. Because you see, if we truly believe that common faith in dignity and human rights, if this is at the heart of our refugee policies and programs, then we have to ask whose equal dignity, whose equal rights are unequally threatened or denied. The option for the poor is for the sake of equality in a world that has so profoundly denied it. We begin with that common faith in dignity and human rights, but we always ask, who are those among us whose dignity, whose rights are systemically threatened, imperiled, or denied? And always the answer is women, always the answer is children, and in a special way, the plight of refugees, those exactly like me, albeit, as Simone Weil says, marked by such affliction. So these three fundamental interpretive gambits, ways of thinking, a recognition of dignity is always binding us in solidarity, in a solidarity of solidarities, that it emphasizes the freedom, not merely what we are free from, but the freedom to effectively participate in our communities. And this would be to give refugee voices in refugee policy itself, accompaniment. And finally, the option for the poor, to address those most vulnerable in the very name of equality itself. Now, this is our Catholic understanding, Catholic in the lowercase, the sense of meaning universal. But Catholic also can be understood, as I say, in the uppercase sense of bearing the marks of a specific tradition that is enriched by its biblical foundations. And I want to say a word simply about this to echo what my companion, Father Elias, has already said, that the language of justice in the scriptures is covenant fidelity, always marked by a special concern for the widow, the orphan, the stranger. And why? Because these were the most vulnerable in kinship societies, tragically, then as today, those most vulnerable among us, those whose very humanity claims us, fratelli tutti, binding us as brothers and sisters all. So that sense of Catholic in the large C sense translates the fundamental biblical motifs into an ethics of accompaniment and indeed of discipleship. What is required is not merely honoring the fundamental human rights of refugees, of stateless persons, and internally displaced. That is absolutely crucial. It is the foundation. For St. Ignatius, this is the substance of his first week of the spiritual exercises, the demands of morality itself. But we are invited to do more. I reflect, as does Pope Francis in Fratelli Tutti, on the central parable for Christian ethics of the Good Samaritan. And we forget that the Samaritans were the avowed enemies of the Jews. They were regarded as apostates. And the irony of that parable, it is the outsider, the one outside the story, who tells the lawyer the very meaning of the law. The lawyer's question, who is my neighbor, is the question which fundamental morality, humanitarian protocols, humanitarian law address. Who is my neighbor? It is my neighbor in need, the most vulnerable among us indeed. But it is significant that the question Jesus answers is not the question in that parable that the lawyer poses. The lawyer asks, who is my neighbor? Jesus poses a counter question, as so often in the parables. He asks, what does it mean to become a neighbor? I am not the still point from which love radiates. Rather, I must become neighbor. I must be placed in the story of the other. I must cross over, as does the Good Samaritan, into the world of the naked, half-dead stranger. The question with which the parable begins, Master, what must I do to receive eternal life, is answered to cross over into the world of the suffering poor, of the naked, half-dead stranger. Gustavo Gutierrez, one of the founders of liberation theology, says, for a Christian, the question is not whom do I find in my journey, but in whose journey am I placed? In whose journey do I place myself? And that is what was required for those of us, I think, who are Catholic. For instance, those of us who are religious, not merely Catholic, not only in the small c sense that we bear a common faith, but in specific traditions that bind us as Jews, as Christians, as Buddhists, as Muslims. It is to enter into the world of the suffering stranger, to become neighbor to our brother or a sister, exactly like me, marked by affliction. The humanitarian protocols require that we take the victim's side. Scripture requires that we take it as our own, that we become, as Christ for Augustine was, good Samaritans, that is, those who themselves identify with those who have been denied voice, to allow that voice to be heard of the refugees themselves. We are called...
Thank you, Bill. Time is up. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Could I end? I'll just leave Elias with one final word here, because I think entering into the story of another is also to be immeasurably enriched by the refugees themselves. It is to let their story touch our hearts. And I want to conclude just with the words of one of our refugees in Kakuma. He says, Father, there is no need to be anxious. You fear because of uncertainties. We as refugees experienced these uncertainties from the moment we started running from our countries. When we took the first step from our lands, we did not know the future. Those were dark, uncertain moments. We lost everything, but God saved us So we are still living. We do not know the future, but we know that God will care for us. Even when we die with God who loves and cares for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Bill, for those words on ethics of accompaniment. And now we'll invite Mr. Andre Atsu, the Regional Director of Jesuit Refugee Service Eastern Africa, to give us some lessons from the field, success, challenges, and future of refugee assistance. Welcome, Andre.
Thank you, Elias. Just give me 1 second to load my presentation. I'm trying to look for it. Yeah. Tell me if you see it.
Okay, we can see it now.
Yes.
You can put full screen.
Yeah.
Okay, 15 minutes, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you so much, and thanks for the invitation to share some lessons from the field. I will start by saying I will be talking more about Eastern Africa and the Horn of Africa, but the situation is also replicated across Africa and across the globe. So within the Horn, we have approximately 4.7 million refugees. And if we even add the number of other forcibly displaced people, this will be a very high population. And the majority of these people are children under the age of 18. As JRS, now, just a month ago, we have reaffirmed our vision and our mission in the new strategic plan that we came up with, where we say that our vision is a world where forcibly displaced people can obtain protection, opportunity, and participation in sustainable, just, and reconciled communities. As we know, how do you call it? Yes, the situation which Elias mentioned is there. We need to redefine the aid. We need to redefine our approach, conflict. But at the moment and currently, while we are faced with people who are displaced, we need to provide also immediate solution. And this is what we are trying to do. Just a second, I seem to have uploaded a wrong presentation. So, but I will continue talking by saying that the situation in the region, Eastern Africa region, is really calling us to look into how do we address displacement? What solution do we provide in the immediate? In Eastern Africa, we work in, how do you call it? In 6 countries. And in these 6 countries, ranging from Ethiopia up to Burundi, we have presence of serving more than 60,000 people. And this is a very daunting activity where we have to dedicate our life in ensuring that the people who have been displaced have protection and are able to also advocate for their own life. If we look at, how do you call it, the current situation in the region, we as a GRS, some of the success that we are proud of and which we really talk about, we may not mention in terms of success, but we'll talk about impact. What we look at is whom have we impacted on and how have our services impacted on the people we accompany. In the area of education, which is our main area of, or one of our key cornerstone, we accompany people displaced in the, we look at teacher training, providing scholarship, and looking at accompany children who are disabled. And this really help us to look at, I need to pause a bit so that I'm able to look at the projection. Oh, it's okay. Let me just do this. Apologies for this. Interruption. Okay, here we go. Can you see the full screen?
Yes. This is what we had.
So just to give some perspective, so these are the countries in which we work, and looking at success stories, and I was saying that we talk more about impact, otherwise mentioning like success is like we are so proud in terms of we have won something. So education, as I was mentioning earlier, we look into scholarship, inclusive education, and here we look into children and vulnerable. Adult education, post-secondary, vocational training, and market linkage. And then we look also into reconciliation and pastoral. And here, one will ask, what is the reconciliation about? People who have been displaced and also put in a certain community, at times erupt conflict between them and the community. But in addition to conflict between them and the community where they are, even within themselves, there is need to be reconciled before they embrace the future, what is given to them. So we look into especially promoting reconciliation, starting from small children. We look into Peace Club, Peace Ambassadors. We have reconciliation activities within the community, and then also in the individual. Talking about pastoral as a faith-based organization, and precisely a Jesuit organization, knowing that accompaniment, especially pastoral accompaniment, is key, and there are people who have faith who have been displaced, then we also accompany them. Another area which we look into, and we accompany refugees or displaced, those who have been forcibly displaced, is mental health and psychosocial support. This is also another key component of our activity, because people who have been displaced have encountered a number of distress, trauma, and they need also healing. And we accompany them. And in terms of basic needs, some of the crucial things that we realize, especially for displaced people in urban setting, is they need housing. they need medical attention, they need food. And these are the most urgent things that we also work with. Protection is also something particular for us. We have situation of people we serve who have been violently abused. And in addition to that, we have children who have fled and find themselves unaccompanied. So this is some activity that we carried out. And like I mentioned, the impact we have had over especially 2024 has ranged of accompanying more than 620,000 people. And to just again come back to some of the success story, hearing people telling us how our accompaniment has helped them in terms of attaining self-reliance, attaining or being protagonists of their own life and in their future, help us also give us strength to continue our service. Challenges abound a lot, and here I will just raise a few. In terms of global challenges, some have been highlighted by Professor Elias and Professor Bill. In terms of, we look at the rising displacement, Professor Elias mentioned about Congo. We are talking now about still 2 years now almost, about Sudan, into conflict, internal conflict in Ethiopia, South Sudan, and the list continues. So this is some of the challenges we face, which still generate more displacement. We are looking into increased humanitarian needs and assistance using the root cause of displacement not being addressed, and that is also something that Professor Elias mentioned. Arupe, who is our founder, at the onset said that we as organization, and a message also to the Jesuit, is that as we address the humanitarian situation, especially the people who have been forcibly displaced, we also have the duty and the mission to look into the root cause and what can be done about that. In terms of regional challenges, we are looking into, Professor Elias still and Bill also mentioned about the protracted situation within this region. Then I mentioned earlier all the conflicts here. At times, access to people who have been displaced is a big issue, and because there is insecurity or either host government don't give us access, and this hamper our ability to provide services. The exploitation I mentioned of vulnerable people, children, adults. These are some of the challenges we are confronted with. And last, as again highlighted, resources which are not there. More often, some of the things that we realize is that either crises have the limelight or they are more talked about than others. Limit our ability also to provide services to those who need. And looking into future plan, we are looking into how do we empower more people who are displaced and communities through education, livelihood. We are looking into advocating for their inclusion, and inclusion is some of the things that also is a challenge and which we need to face. I think Professor Elias mentioned in terms of building the capacity of the community and building the capacity of the people so that they are included and are able to support the huge number of displacement. Resilience is also another area we are looking into, supporting strengthening the mental health, community network, social cohesion, and then as an organization, we are looking into long-term solutions that address the root cause of displacement, promoting environmental sustainability practices. What we don't realize these days is that we have a huge number of climate migrant or displaced people, and this is something that we are not paying attention to. So if we don't address it now, it's going to be another war in quote that we will be fighting. Then last but not least, strengthening local system and capacity to ensure lasting impact. So thank you so much for having me, and looking forward for questions. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Andre, for those insightful experiences from the ground in Eastern Africa and Central Africa as well. And now our last speaker is Amaya, who is speaking to us from Rome. And she will also be giving us some of the lessons learned here on advocacy on behalf of the forcibly displaced persons. Amaya, the floor is yours. And you can already be posting any questions that you have online.
Thank you very much, Asante sana, Father Elias. So Father Bill was mentioning about Kakuma camp. I lived there in 1996. And at that time, there were 56,000 people living there. Right now, 350,000 people. So clearly, the increase of forcibly displaced people in the world is very, very, very high. It's a global issue, although it's a very local reality. And so I'm going to start by just sharing with you the story of Christine, with whom I started a relationship of trust, of friendship there in Kakuma. I was just sharing some time of silence in the church in Kakuma, and she was there. We were, her and I alone. Christine was from South Sudan, and then we sort of started a beautiful friendship. Until today, we write to each other. Just to mention the shared humanity. I was very young at that time, and to me, this friendship with Christine opened a world to the refugees and the forcibly displaced people. So everything starts with a human relationship. Are you seeing the screen?
Yes, we see the screen.
You can see. You can make it full if you want.
Yeah. Just... Mm-hmm.
You can put the full screen, Amaya.
Yes, sorry. There's something wrong with that.
Oh, it's now disappeared.
No worries. I think I have a problem. Anyways, I will start by talking about the mission of JRS. We listened to Father Bill and then Andre talking first about accompaniment and about service. our mission is threefold. So today I'm going to talk about our mission to advocate. I have the privilege to work also with the Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development. You listened to Cardinal Michael Czerny yesterday. And one of the things that we listen to when we listen to the local churches is the need for prophetic advocacy. Many people working together with migrants and refugees tell us to please use the voice of the people, to listen to the voice of the people. In today's gospel, we heard about John the Baptist, the great prophet. And so this is a moral obligation to really advocate to those who have no voice. But in reality, people do have voice. We are not the voice of the people. It's advocacy. It's about articulating that voice in a way that it can be listened by others, by those who make decisions about their lives. I think in the Jesuit refugee service, but also all the people who are working together with migrants and refugees have a privileged position to understand the reality of the people, to understand the aspirations, the challenges, as Andre explained to us. It's not a theory, it's not an abstract reality, but we have the moral obligation to really articulate those challenges in a way, as I said, that people can make decisions. During these last days, the reality people were living in Goma, the atrocious human rights violations were known to all the world, although it is a quite forgotten situation. And in Jerez, we every day we channel the information we were getting from our country director, Victor, who was listening to the shooting, the looting of shops, of markets there. And more or less in a sort of a real time, we were in touch with the embassies, with the UK embassy especially. So our work is about channeling the information and articulating in a way that people can make decisions. The second thing I want to say is that we have the best advocate, the best global advocate is Pope Francis. Pope Francis is really the global voice of the refugees. Much of our work is also to articulate forgotten situations and to share them with the Vatican, and to ask Pope Francis not to forget and to mention realities that are forgotten, such as in places like Myanmar or Sudan. He has regularly prayed for these situations. And it's really the only global leader who articulates this voice and the world attention to these conflicts. We listened to Cardinal Michael yesterday talking about the dialogue of life, interreligious dialogue, but there is part of this dialogue that talks about life. And I liked very much what he says, that the test of the authenticity of our faith is the way we welcome the refugee, the migrant. And I think he was sort of articulating the vision of Pope Francis very well when Pope Francis talks about 4 verbs that we in JRS try to make a reality in our advocacy. It's about welcoming, protecting, promoting, and integrating the forcibly displaced people. I think also Andre mentioned the question of localization as a policy that we are listening a lot in the humanitarian world right now. But for us in the church, we have been working close to people and understanding this localization very well, because life is local. I don't like so much the concept of global advocacy, because it's really local advocacy connected to global possibilities rather than doing global advocacy. So advocacy is really local. I think there are 3 areas where we need to focus our advocacy. The first is to understand the goal. it is very important to have clear goals, clear targets. Sometimes we oversee this, but for us in JERES, we see this as a very a good practice and lesson learned. Right now, we have 3 priorities in our global advocacy, which are access to education. Andre told us very clearly that this is a priority. So access to not only primary, but secondary education and higher education, and the fact that how refugees need to be integrated in the local reality of education. This is key. The second priority for us in JERES is to be able to offer access to mental health and psychosocial support because we ground all our advocacy in the services and the accompaniment we do. This is key because in many places in the world, we see that mental health is not a priority, is not well founded. And so one of our priorities is to seek that this support regarding mental health is provided to traumatized refugees. And the third priority is access to documentation and to legal status, but also access to territory. We know that more and more people are having difficulties in accessing the territory. And one of our priorities is to call for alternatives of accessing the territory in a legal and a safe way, so as people avoid dangerous routes such as the Mediterranean and the Canary Islands. But also access to the documentation. As we know, many of the refugees we are working with, even in Nairobi, tell us that even if they have refugee status, the fact of not having the permits, the right documents, even if they go to university, they will never be able to access employment because there is a hindrance in the residence and work permits. So this is key to work together so as access to documentation is available. I think another issue in advocacy to be successful is to work with the right partners. I think we have many good practices here, and let me just share 3. For example, in DRC, a local reality we are working with is all the question of sexual and base violence. And we work together with groups of men, creating clubs which are called positive masculinity. This is very beautiful because we work with not only women, but men who are formed in the way to relate to women. And this is really a very local and culturally rooted exercise. And it's a very success way to advocate because it's a very community-based advocacy, and we have many success stories here. From this local reality, we also talk about the importance of fighting against SGBV in a global level. We had a very important symposium in Rome, organized jointly by JERES, but also with the UK Embassy to the Holy See, where we had these positive examples of fight against SGBV, and the UK Embassy is very keen on funding and promoting this sort of community-based positive masculinity exercises. The second good practice I want to share regarding good partners is an ecumenical initiative that has to do with access to territory. Back in the year 2000, the community of Sant'Egidio, a Catholic lay organization, together with the evangelical churches and also the Valdesian table, so it's a Christian ecumenical initiative, started what we call the Humanitarian corridors. This is a very important initiative which identifies vulnerable refugees in third countries, such as Lebanon, identifies vulnerable refugees from Syria or Iraq, and takes them in a safe way through humanitarian visas to third countries where they can seek asylum in a legal way, but they avoid the risk of jumping in a boat and risking their lives. This is a very successful project where JRS also has been involved in integrating the refugees that arrived in Italy or in France or in Belgium. And we think it could be replicated by governments. Like what we are saying is that the church is involved in providing this initiative, but it is really a political solution to the possibility that refugees could seek safety and asylum in a safe way. So we are talking to governments and providing this example, this good practice, and making sure that they have this good practice in mind so they can replicate it at a government level. This happened with the Ukrainian refugees, as you know. In Europe, they were granted the temporary protection status. And this is an example that when there is political will, it is possible that refugees have a temporary protection even when political and governments want it. There is political will. We are saying that the situation of Ukrainians could be the same for Afghanis, for Congolese people, and for others, but we are seeing a great discrimination against them. The third reality I want to share, it has to do with a global good practice, which is the human trafficking campaign. We do this together with Talita Kum. We fight against the human trafficking, and precisely this week, there are many, many youth ambassadors in Rome working together with Talita Kum, which is a wonderful network of religious sisters around the world. This is promoted by the Union of Superior Generals, the UISG, and Talita Kum works in different regions of the world, of course in Africa, making sure that religious communities have an eye on human trafficking and provide protection and integration of survivors. This morning, members of Talita Kum and also the youth ambassadors, together with survivors of human trafficking, were visiting Pope Francis just this morning. And Pope Francis is, again, our best advocate to talk about human trafficking, which is, as you know, an evil in our world, and a sort of silent and hidden evil. This has to do very much with migration. Many people who migrate through dangerous routes are vulnerable to human trafficking, are exploited, and so they are engaged in networks of, in criminal networks of trafficking. These brave religious sisters confront criminal gangs and are able to rescue survivors from these horrible networks. And this is a great example of how, by working together with great partners, organizations like JRS can be successful. I think we have many, many success stories of interfaith and Catholic organizations working together with migrants and refugees. Of course, JRS is not the only one. We actually work with many communities, such as the Scalabrinis or others, and we are really present in every corner of the planet and rooted in the realities of the people. Our communities are frontline actors, and we play really a fundamental role in the protection and assistance of refugees and migrants. The good thing, I think, is that we are present in the 4 stages of the migratory experience: in the departure from the place of origin, in the transit in a given territory, in the arrival, and followed by the integration process. And sometimes, of course, finally, in the return to the homeland of those who decide or are forced to do so. In each of these stages and what happens in them, the church is present in various ways. As we have seen by listening to Father Elias and Father Bill and Andre, in the most remote and hidden places, we can find interreligious realities, but also little communities from many different congregations carrying a silent and courageous work. In migration routes from South American and Central American countries to Mexico and the United States, we witness that many religious sisters there help women trapped in the trafficking networks, as I say. Catholic organizations and associations such as Caritas, the Scalabrini, Franciscans International, as I said, the community of Sant'Egidio intervene both locally and internationally. This enables us to amplify the voice of migrants we work closely with in the decision-making forums in the United Nations, in Geneva or New York. We advocate for the rights to education, as I said, the right not to be detained for being a migrant. For example, the Scalabrini, inspired by Bishop Giovanni Scalabrini, they provide direct service to migrants and refugees, but they also study and offer deep analysis of the reality and challenges of migration through many research centers worldwide, there are many in Africa. Us in GRS are present in over 50 countries, and our priority, as I said, is quality education, both of children and adults. I think these ecclesial realities are called to work together and coordinate efforts to provide effective responses. I think the question of causes is very key. Father Elias mentioned the causes. I'm not going to talk about that, but I think it's something that we really need to focus on when we talk about migrants and refugees always, because there is a disconnect between the causes and the symptoms. But I also think that the solutions are not yet there in the debate. We need to work further to talk about the solutions of repatriation whenever it's possible, of resettlement, and of local integrations. These are the three solutions for the forcibly displaced people. I am going to end now with a story of hope. We are talking about Fratelli Tutti, and Pope Francis is inviting us this year to do a pilgrimage of hope, to enter in that holy door, rather small door, difficult door, where we need to work together, as I said, but to become humble, and by being humble, to listen to the people we accompany. I think throughout history and following the footsteps of Jesus, we have sought to walk alongside migrants and refugees as a church in remote areas and often far from media attention. But as Matthew 25 reminds us, there we see the face of Jesus. I was a stranger and you welcome me. Jesus presents himself in the migrant, in the refugee, inviting us to welcome and to love them. I'm going to invite you to travel to the Blue Nile State in Sudan, and to enter in the life of a woman called Amira. Amira and her 10 children, the youngest of whom was 1 year and 6 months old, fled when the civil war broke out in 2012. They left with only the clothes on their backs and spent 9 days in the wilderness without food, water, or medicine before reaching a village on the Sudanese border. They stayed there for a year before moving to Gendarusa refugee camp in Maban, South Sudan, where they still live. As we all know, life in a refugee camp is tough, but Amira, who was forced to marry at 14 and had to abandon school, decided to pursue her lifelong dream to become a teacher. She enrolled in a 4-year teacher training program managed by JRS in the camp and earned a teaching certificate from the University of Juba. Now, Amira teaches in 2 primary schools in the camp, and she says, "For me, education is everything." As Pope Francis explained in his message for the 2024 World Day of Migrants and Refugees, the poor save us, refugees save us, because they help us to see the face of God and they ground us in reality. Amira, to me, is a concrete example of someone who did not succumb to pessimism and instead rekindled hope. She embodies what Pope Francis invites us in this Jubilee of Hope, to walk together with refugees and migrants in optimism, in hope, and make the Jubilee be an occasion for everyone to rekindle this hope. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Amaya. Our time is almost up. If we have any quick questions, I'll turn it over to Father Innocent. Any interactions, any quick clarification?
I think thank you very much on this wonderful panel led by Hekima University College and their partners in the US and also in Rome. Yeah. So we will allow some few questions, interaction online. And we have 10 to 15 minutes of interactions, questions, and comments. What I liked very much from the this panel, first of all, the first point is that there is a disconnect between the humanitarian aid and sustainable peace. I think that is a key message which came from Professor Elias. Of course, calling for the decolonization of the humanitarian aid and addressing the root causes, and at the same time looking for African-led solutions. Professor William emphasized more on the accompaniment of the refugees, migrants, and displaced persons who are caught up in many stories, and their stories are often lost. Yeah, and they're often lost. And he alluded to the let's say what he calls African anthropology of Ubuntu. We are because I am, and I am because we are, and the Ujamaa, again going back to the African led solutions. He said very much on the equality and the dignity of every person based on the fact that we are all created in the image of God. Andre spoke about the local, concrete experience of involvement in accompanying the refugees with the Jesuit refugee service. And Amaya gave us a global perspective from Rome. Yeah. Talking about Talita Kum, talking about the Calabrinians, and then the link with the Pope, and basically is about advocacy. And it says that we don't have to be the voiceless of the rich. They have a voice. It's just to help them to to speak for themselves and see the way forward. Just in terms of summary. So we have about 10 minutes of interactions. If please you have a questions or remark from the presentation, you are welcome. And thank you, Father Elias, for leading and putting up this panel. Wonderful panel. Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm. You're welcome.
If you want to make a comment, you can just raise up your hand, and then we will take the question. Already a comment.
Just for the innocence.
Okay.
I was
Augustine, welcome.
for the lines for your William and everybody. Prof, I have a small question. I don't know if it's a question or something that is really on my mind is we spoke about little effort being done to actually address the root causes of conflict in bid to the whole discourse of refugee and migration. And then connecting it with Professor William, he spoke about accompaniment and the refugee voices. So one of the things that is moving in my mind as for organizations like JRS and others within the NGO space that do a lot of work into refugees and migrants, how can they play that mediatory role in probably applying a bit of pressure on the authorities or international community or whatever it is for the governments in the Great Lakes region, for instance, in actually addressing the root causes of conflict, in bringing these refugee voices to the table within that space where they sit. How can this be done? Aware of the political dynamics, the political economy of the whole refugee discourse. You spoke about billions of dollars that are spent in peacekeeping and all that. It's one of the things that is going on in my mind. Maybe if you could probably throw a bit of light on that. Thank you.
Is that like a general question to everyone?
Yeah, is there any other question or comment? Because that was addressed to to Professor Elias. Maybe you can respond quickly, Prof.
Yeah, the gap between the monies being spent and the humanitarian service, I guess that's what, Augustine, you're asking. And where do we then put in more priority? I think there's a whole issue of how humanitarian industry has evolved over the years and the amount of money being spent and the model that is really not sustainable for long-term future. I think we need to put equal efforts in terms of early warning mechanisms so that we're able to address some of these conflicts much more in advance. Here at Hekima University College at our Center for Research, Training and Publications, we've been looking at early warning, early response mechanisms by doing a conflict monitoring research in Kenya, Ethiopia, South Sudan, and DRC. And our indicators clearly show that there are quite a number of conflicts that we would have anticipated and perhaps even stopped. The case of Sudan with RSF, a lot of grievances that had been raised already for many, many years, and these were not being addressed. I was in Goma last year in November. We've been conducting research there for the last 5 years. And it was clear that at some point, the M23 will take control of Goma. And all indications were there, but nothing was being really done to reinforce that particular piece or even address some of those grievances, apart from some of the protocols that we've had, especially the Nairobi Protocol. We've looked at the whole issue of debt burden and mismanagement of external debts by a number of African countries and over-reliance on debt. And all prediction, including IGAD Center for Early Warning, had already presented this to the African governments that by end of 2023, 2024, when a number of African countries will be obliged to pay back their debt, there's high likelihood of increasing the cost of living by increasing taxes. And this is likely also to lead to demonstrations, high cost of food, and destabilization of a number of these countries. And so, as predicted in 2024 and 2023, we saw a rise in street demonstrations around the cost of living. So these are some of the key indicators, I think, for us. And the other one is social exclusion, which continues to mar quite a number of our societies, where particular political or ethnic groups want to dominate power through military and also political power. And this, again, is not sustainable. You cannot leave aside close to 30 or 40 or 50% of the population at the advantage of just a few. With time, it explodes and it becomes very problematic to address. Yeah, so maybe that's what I would say for now in terms of this. But I think there's a whole need for rethinking on how we manage humanitarian service. I think it's not sustainable.
Thank you very much, Prof. Any other questions, remarks, reaction to the presentation in general?
Can I just add something to the question of Augustine, because he was also mentioning about the disconnect with the causes, and I want to share something with you. I was in the Canary Islands talking to the mother of a Senegalese young man who died trying to reach the shores of the Canary Islands. And the young man came from Senegal. I asked the mother, why did your son jump in the boat? What was the reason? Why did he escape Senegal? There was no war at that time, more or less a stable country. So I wanted to understand the causes. And she mentioned the following thing. She mentioned, we came from a little village close to the sea, and our livelihoods is fishing, traditional fishing. But the French and the Korean boats came, and they took away all the traditional fishing. So there is a question of trade also there. No, there's the chain sort of needs to be totally and globally understood. The man then went to the inner side of Senegal to cultivate the peanuts, but then the dumping of prices with the peanuts from the States came in, and so all the production stopped, and so this man lacked totally the access to livelihoods. And those were the reasons why this man left Senegal. You see, so it's not only analyzing what seem to be the root causes of forced migration, like conflicts or human rights violations, but there is more and more and more. And we know this in Congo. There is a chain of greed connected to the Western world also, and we need to see the full picture. And I think this is key.
So if I might just add to that, so important, Amaya, as you said, and Elias and Andre, that we hear the stories of the refugees, that there's their story be told, their narrative, because it becomes a counter narrative to the narratives of the lie, which we're seeing, for instance, in my country now, redescribing the refugees, criminalizing. And I think we have to begin with their voice, their story, just as you have said. And human rights become the grammar of telling that story, to tell the true narrative. And I think our work begins there. That's the accompaniment, is to listen to the story of the refugee. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If there are more reactions and comments on this rich presentation put up by Hekima University College. Yeah. Okay, fine. If there is no, we can take. Once again, allow me to thank each and everyone for your time, especially Father William. You had to wake up. I think it's early in the morning, or in the US. Thank you very much. It shows the importance you have put on in this conference, and really it's timely. Yeah. just see what's happening in the US with the current government, or from the US to Goma, yeah, the recent crisis, yeah. So it's really a timely conversation. Yeah. What I would like to request is you put up your papers, if you can give us, practical orientations in your papers. So we'll put all that together and see how to make a follow-up so that it doesn't just remain a conference like other conferences. Yeah, call to action. And so, yeah, that will help us a lot to continue the conversation so that we don't forget the voice of the refugees, migrants, and displaced persons, which are lost. And somehow they are caught up, as you said, in this, and then their voices are lost. Yeah. Again, for advocacy, yeah, for advocacy and so on in the future, so that we continue the conversation. We will remain on the same Zoom link because our next presenters, it's a panel put up by Brother Rogers.